Hey, morning, Logan. It's time for another episode of Math from Your Couch. Today we're going to finish off the segment relationships within circles. And the last thing we want to take a look at is what happens when two tangents intersect each other outside of the circle. I'm going to be honest, I feel that this is the easiest one of all three that we've gone over recently. This one here, it's just you have two tangent lines, two lines that hit the circle at exactly 1 point. So if you took segment AB and extended it, you'll notice that that segment actually only hits the circle once at point A. And the same thing is true about segment CB. It hits it only once right here. Even if you extended it further, it still only hits the circle in one location. All right, so to break this thing down, what we want to do is we want to color code it. So we're going to take a look at those two segments, AB being purple and CB being yellow. And right away, it's I don't want to say it's obvious, but you can kind of tell what the relationship is going to be. So this is the relationship. If two tangents intersect outside the circle, what you can now say is that those two tangents are going to be congruent to each other. In other words, segment AB is equal to segment CB, the lengths of those things. Let's jump into a problem. So this is what we have. Let's suppose that segment AB was 5x minus 4, and then that segment BC is 2x plus 5. Well, we can logically conclude using that property up above, since these two segments, these two tangents, start at the same point and are tangent to the same exact circle, then they must be congruent to each other. So we're going to write down 5x minus 4, which is AB, and 2x plus 5, which is CB. They must equal each other. Right here, you have a basic algebra 1 problem. I'm going to go ahead and take away that 2x from both sides of the equation. This is going to give us 3x minus 4 is equal to 5. And then I'm going to add 4 to both sides, which will give us 3x is equal to 9. And then we'll divide both sides of the equation by 3 to isolate the x. And we find out that x is in fact equal to 3. And this is pretty much it. I can get it a little bit, I can get the problem to be a little bit more spicy than this, but for the most part, it's just going to be that the two segments are congruent to each other as long as they're tangent to the same circle and they start at the same exact point on the outside of that circle. All right, so let's take a look at another example. This is a different type of problem, but it uses the same philosophy. So what we have is we have a triangle. Now in this triangle, we have a circle inscribed inside of it. So there's a circle inscribed inside the triangle. What you'll notice is that we have parts of the triangle, and what we need to do is figure out how long or what is the length or measurement of x. At first, this actually looks like a really complicated problem, but when you break it down, you start to realize that it's not that bad. So what you want to do is you want to find all the parts that are congruent to each other. Now remember, if two lines are tangent to the same exact circle and they start at the same exact place outside of the circle, then they must be congruent. So what we want to do is we want to find all the congruent pieces. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight them for you. So we got all these pieces congruent to each other. So this blue piece and this blue piece, they've got to be the same because they're both tangent to the same circle and they start at the same exact point outside of the circle. The same thing can be stated about this piece of the tangent, is that this piece right here is congruent to this piece right here because they both start outside of the circle and they're tangent to the same exact circle. So you'll notice that it's not the entire length, it's not the entire 10, but it's only this part of the 10 starting at the circle and ending at the common point, as well as this part of the 13. And then finally, the same thing can be stated about the 5. The next thing you want to do, after you identify all the pieces that are congruent to each other, okay, you're going to want to find out all the pieces, you're going to want to find out if you know any measurements for those pieces. So for me, one of the measurements that I'm looking for is, do I know the blue? Well, I don't, but I do know that this is x right here. So whatever this x is here, whatever this happens to be, then this will have to be. So if this guy right here is 9, then this x is 9. Unfortunately, I don't know what this is, so I'm going to keep going. This yellow and this yellow, I don't know how long the yellow is. I do know the yellow and the blue are the same, and the yellow and the, sorry, not the same. I do know that the yellow and the blue add up to 10, but I don't know how much either of them is by themselves. I also see that the yellow and the red add up to 13. Now, what I notice is that this piece right here, this red piece is 5, which now tells me that this piece must be 5. So the first thing I want to do is I want to find all the parts that are congruent. The second thing I want to do is find out, do I know any of those parts? So over here, you'll notice the red piece I know is 5, which means this red piece is 5. And then now I can chain this information to find out what x is. So now that I know that 5 and 5 are the same here, I now know that the yellows are the same. I just have to figure out what the yellow is. But I know that the red and the yellow, this whole thing is 13. And this piece is 5, which means I need to be able to add the 5 to something to get 13. And that is going to be 8. So I now know that 5 plus 8 is 13. I know that this guy's 5 because they're congruent to each other. But this unlocks now the yellow. Now the yellow pieces must be the same. And since I know that this yellow piece is 8, then the yellow piece connected to the blue piece has to be 8 as well. And then this chains this problem on over here because I know that 8, the yellow piece, plus whatever this blue piece is, has to add up to 10. So I know that 8 plus 2 is going to equal to 10. And then finally, I now know that this blue piece is equal to this blue piece, which means this x must equal to 2. So the idea is you have a lot of information. You want to break it down to the smallest pieces that you know. You know that tangents are congruent to each other as long as they start outside of the circle at the same position. And then you know that the segments, when you add them, have the entire length of the sides of those triangles. All right. Take a look at the assignment. If you have any questions, go ahead and hit me up on Google Classroom or send me an email. Hope to talk to you guys next week.